I guess I'm also asking if you would think it's fair to say that something like in quantum physics they use non-reflexive logic, and if it's fair to say that that system itself depends upon the classical laws.
I think you could probably make an argument like that. Yeah, exactly.
I would ask that too, the dialecticism. In what relation does it have to kind of the standard logic that we have too? Sometimes you can get these formal mathematical systems or formal that pragmatically get you can do certain things. But I would like to know, at a more fundamental level, how does that relate to the very issue of knowledge itself? Does it always apply in every case? The breakdown of disjunctions and stuff like that. So those are kind of questions. I don't think it's an objection. It doesn't bother me or worry me. Kind of like what Jay said.
But Father Deacon, would you say that you feel like a paraconsistent logic still depends upon the classical laws in kind of a transcendental sense?
Well, it certainly, at the very least, relates to it, right? That, and so I'd put the burden of proof on the person to be like, well, why don't you explain to me how it relates? And furthermore, let me know what. I mean, I don't like. Why would that be a defeater for a transcendental argument?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, you have to give an account for how knowledge is possible. And so you're absolutizing something.
Right.
The transcendental argument. One way you can formulate it is in the disjunctive. I don't have to, right? There's something more fundamental to the transcendental argument than the disjunctive syllogism, because the disjunctive syllogism depends on that transcendental argument. It's epistemically prior to. So I really don't understand what their objections are, or why that would be problematic. And maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe I'll think about that some more. That still doesn't it depend on a more kind of fundamental logic?
It's kind of like,
is it absolute? Does it depend on? Does it exist on its own? Those are all really important questions.
It's kind of like when people posit, well, how do you know that there's not a perfectly logically consistent universe where it's just an atom that exists and there's nothing inconsistent or incoherent with that? So there's another worldview that proves your transcendental argument false. But what they don't understand, and it's similar to the objection that JF brought up, with his computer universe of a planet or whatever, that's not actually a defeater, because it's a question of justification. So you positing that possible world actually doesn't function as a justification for the possibility of knowledge. So they don't understand that the transcendental argument is making an argument about the justifications for the possibility of knowledge. So you positing a possible world where there's just a computer or just an atom actually isn't any kind of defeater or a justification. It's really saying nothing.
I think on JF's view, he doesn't use these words, but I think he's kind of a Lewis-style modal realist. I think he believes that the imagined worlds really exist.
Which is, right, to confuse potentia with actuality, which is exactly what the sim theory people do. As we're going to see when I go through the analysis of this guy's book, you'll start to notice that he's making the same mistakes of people like JF and others who are arguing that, well, if it's potential, it has to also be actual. And that's something that Father Deacon's pointed out with the Lewis guy, that what happened is that some of these physicists don't understand philosophy. So they actually think that when philosophers talk about possible worlds, that somehow that makes them ontologically real. It's just kind of stupid, really.
You should watch that video of Professor Dreyfus up in Berkeley, Hubert Dreyfus, who's a
phenomenologist.
He's one of the leading Heideggerian scholars, but he's an interesting figure because he also taught at MIT and has quite a bit of interactions with the the computer science guys and their AI project.
Yeah, we read Dreyfus in my grad phenomenology classes, so we had to read him, Husserl, Heidegger,
Yeah.
and Dermot Moran in our grad class. So I know what you're talking about.
His critique is hilarious because he's like, these scientists keep thinking they're coming up with novel things, like they're on the cutting edge. They're the first person to come up with this idea, and he's like, don't you realize that this stuff has been thought through in philosophy and failed like hundreds and thousands, sometimes even 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago? And they're like, we're working, they don't even realize, because they don't read philosophy, that they've already worked through these ideas. Primary
example is this MIT guy's book on simulation theory, Rizwan Virk, that I'm covering right now. Because later on in the book, he starts talking about potential worlds and actual worlds, and they're literally thinking that they're collapsing potentia into actuality, pure act. So it's like a reverse Thomism where anything that's potential has to also be actual.
And they kind of get this way too, if you think about, if they can get a formal system, or if they get the mathematics to check out, they think they've proven it.
Yeah, well,
part of their ignorance is just the philosophy of science, that you can have multiple paradigms and you get all the mathematics to check it. That's not what makes it real. But for a physicist, they were like, oh, we did it. We've proven through the mathematics the ontology. So they're making the same mistake with these possible worlds.
Yep.
If the possible world formally works out and the mathematics is good, therefore it's actual.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's so dumb. It's like, so they're operating on a naive empiricist epistemology, and then they don't even realize they're starting to do metaphysics with all this gibberish. At the same time, it's still saying that we don't do metaphysics, even though they don't realize all this quantum gibberish nonsense is literally the reintroduction of fantasy and metaphysics. It's just crazy. Like like you said, it's physicists don't know anything about philosophy, and then they're coming up with philosophical concepts from 2,000 years ago that have already been argued. So
every single, I challenge any of you to find some type of scientific theory that wasn't already worked out philosophically in the history of philosophy.
Well,
that'd be an interesting project.
The ironic thing is, like, the in the Salmon Theory book, the guy's like, he's an MIT guy, and he's like, whoa, bro, it's like Carl Jung, it's like Plato. He's like, we discovered Plato. It's like, dude, but you didn't discover anything. Like, you're just repeating Gnostic systems from 2,000 years ago. It's like,
yeah, good point. I'm sorry you got to read through that book, man.
Well, no, actually, it's actually interesting because it's showing that the science tech crowd of people is realizing the collapse of the last 100 years of materialism, and they're trying to make sense of it, and they're trying to cope with intelligent design arguments and principles. They're like, oh, whoa, it looks like the universe is actually like totally super designed. It's crazy. It's like the creationists, Christians have been saying this for a long time. What are you talking about? They're acting like it's some great discovery, and it's like they're just trying to steer all of the creationist design arguments that are coming about in the last several decades that are really just impossible to ignore. They're trying to steer it into, oh, but we live in a simulation. And by the way,
you know what they're going to do? They're going to go the movie Interstellar route, right? Well, this intelligence must be coming from it's not coming from God. It's coming from ourselves in the future.
No, he discusses that in the book. He says the different.
I know. It's just like.
Yeah, he says the different possible theories are aliens, some kind of Gnosticism of an evil creator God that's imprisoned us, or our future selves have advanced to the degree that we're in a simulation that they put us in. We don't even know. So yeah, he mentions that actually.
Well, that's what I said in class the other day. I was holding up Newton's Principia and Einstein's relativity, and I said, actually, did you know that I actually built a time machine, went back in time, and taught them all of this? It's not their word. They're ripping me off.
Yeah.
In the future. I mean, if they can pull that off, why can't I? I'd be like, no, I wrote all these works. I wrote Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, Einstein's Relativity. What's another good?
There's probably some schizo right now who's literally trying to argue that and try to copyright like all the great classic works of literature and say that they're actually his.
There's probably a bunch of people in Discord writing down. They're like, okay, what was that again?
All of our Discord schizos are literally writing that down, trying to figure out how to argue that in the court. They're like, no, actually, because there was a dude who was saying that Bitcoin is actually an evolved super AI that's 500 years advanced from us, and the Bitcoin AI is imprisoning us, and we don't even know it. So actually, the simulation is run by Bitcoin, which you didn't know, but yes.
That's actually, it's quite creative. They make for nice stories. They make for nice bedtime stories you'd like to tell your children.
Well, they're actually, but they're kind of like recycled, like Philip K. Dick style. I mean, it's just like, I feel like I'm just hearing Philip K. Dick all over. And by the way, Philip K. Dick, he actually believed in simulation theory. He said we're living in a simulation. So, and of course, everybody knows he was like, straight up Gnostic, but yeah, it's just rehashing the same ancient stuff all over again. That they think they're making some grand discovery. It's no different than like the stoner who, trips really hard.
Yeah.
And, bro, we're all one. I just realized it. Nobody's ever thought of this, dude. We're all one.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of thinking when you were going through that, I'm like, it sounds like drug abuse and weird thoughts that a person would get from messing with their minds, which I guess that's what bad philosophy is. It's drug
it's
abuse.
A kind of drug abuse.
It's nobody ever says they want to grow up. When they grow up, they want to be a bad philosopher. Subscribe to a false paradigm. I learned it from watching you, Dad.
So, Two Chin says for $5, the premise of Bitcoin is based on Satoshi being wrong about Bitcoin. Okay, so I'm sure that's a super 7,000 IQ statement that I just don't get. But I have no idea what that means. So
I gotta let you go, man. I gotta go get dinner. Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Jay.
Yep. Thank you.
Well,
Any last questions before we close out tonight?